The gun was a Glock 19, and it was pointed at Dorothy Weaver's chest from a distance of about 4 feet, and Dorothy Weaver was not impressed. She had been a nurse in the emergency department of Kingman Regional Medical Center for 31 years. She had seen gunshot wounds come through the doors on gurneys, on foot, carried by other people who were themselves bleeding. She had pressed her hands into holes in human bodies and kept pressing until the surgeons took over. She had sat with people in their last minutes and said the things that needed saying. She had cleaned up after violence so many times that the smell of blood was just a smell to her, the way coffee was a smell, the way desert rain on hot asphalt was a smell. It meant something, but it did not stop the day. The man holding the gun was younger than her by 30 years, thick through the shoulders, with a haircut that cost too much for someone who drove a truck with no front plates. He had come to her door at 11 in the evening on a Tuesday in October with another man behind him who kept his hands in his jacket pockets and his eyes on the driveway. They had not knocked. They had rapped on the wood of the door frame with the particular authority of men who assumed the sound of their arrival was announcement enough. Dorothy had opened the door because she always opened the door. She was 74 years old, and she had lived alone on this piece of desert property for 2 years since Earl passed, and she had not once in those 2 years let fear reorganize her habits. She was not going to start tonight. Ms. Weaver. The first man had a document in his free hand. The gun came out when she looked at it without reaching for it. A technique, she supposed. Make the paper more interesting by making refusal more expensive. You put a gun to my chest, Dorothy said, and I'm still not selling. Her voice did not shake. She noticed that, the way you notice a fact, it was true her voice did not shake, and she was not particularly proud of it, because it was not courage exactly. It was more like the absence of room for anything but clarity. There was the gun, there was the man, there was the document. She had seen the offer before, 3 versions of it over 4 months, each one with slightly more zeros and slightly more urgency, each one from a different holding company name that was, she had by now confirmed, ultimately controlled by the same man. Victor Roth. She had looked Victor Roth up. She had sat at Earl's old desk with his reading glasses on because hers had broken, and she had not yet gotten to the eye doctor. And she had spent 2 evenings reading everything findable about Victor Roth and his development operation. She had read about the projects in Nevada and the ones in New Mexico. She had read about the farming families in 3 other counties who had sold their land in the past 4 years. She had found through a chain of county recorder filings that took patience to follow that Roth's actual interest in the Kingman Valley was not the surface. It was what was under it. A natural gas survey from 2019, quietly commissioned and quietly buried, had found a significant deposit beneath the water table of exactly the valley where her land and the land of 7 other families sat. The man with the gun was still holding it. His arm was getting tired. She could see it in the slight tremor that had developed at the elbow joint, the kind of micro-fatigue that set in around the 90-second mark of holding an extended arm in a fixed position. She had seen that before too, though under different circumstances. There's a camera on the porch Eve, Dorothy said. Has been since 2021. Earl put it in after the Henderson boys' truck was stolen off the road. Everything from the last 10 minutes is uploading to a server in Flagstaff right now. She paused. You should probably think about that. The second man said something quiet to the first. The gun came down. The document went into a jacket pocket. You've got till end of month, Ms. Weaver, the first man said. His voice had changed. The ease was out of it now. I've got as long as I decide I've got, Dorothy said. Good night. She closed the door. She stood in her entry hall with her hand flat against the wood for a moment, listening to their boots on the porch steps, the truck doors, the engine. She listened until the sound of the engine faded completely into the desert night. Then she went to the kitchen and made chamomile tea because her heart rate was up and she was not going to let it stay there. The camera had been on the Eve since 2021. She had not been lying about that. Whether it was currently uploading to a server in Flagstaff was a different question with a different answer. But she had found over the years that people who came to your door with guns were generally more interested in their own exposure than in verifying your claims. She sat at the kitchen table and drank her tea and looked at the photograph of Earl on the windowsill. It was not the formal portrait from his paramedic service days. It was a snapshot taken by their daughter before their daughter moved to Portland. Earl at this same table reading the newspaper, with the morning light coming through the window over the sink and the coffee cup halfway to his lips, and his reading glasses pushed down his nose. A completely ordinary moment. The kind that becomes precious only once the person in it is gone. Earl Weaver had died of a stroke on a Thursday morning in March 2 years ago. He had been making eggs. Dorothy had found him on the kitchen floor when she came in from the yard. She had known immediately the way nurses know things, the way 31 years of looking at human bodies in extremity teaches you to read what the body is telling you before it finishes telling it. She had knelt beside him, and she had held his hand, and she had talked to him, not because she was certain he could hear her, but because she had spent 31 years believing that people in the space between consciousness and unconsciousness were still listening, still there in some essential way that the instruments could not fully measure. And she was not going to be the one to stop believing it when it mattered most. The paramedics had been kind. They always were, when they were good at it. She had not sold the farm. People expected her to. Her daughter in Portland had suggested it, gently, in the way of someone who worried from a distance about a 74-year-old woman alone on 40 acres in the Mojave Desert. Sadie, her granddaughter, who lived in Kingman proper, had offered to let Dorothy move in, which had made Dorothy smile in the way Earl's old jokes made her smile, with genuine warmth and zero intention of acting on it. The farm was not just land. It was the place Earl had brought her 38 years ago, when they were young and broke and full of the specific ambition that hits people in their 30s who have seen enough of other people's urgencies to know what they want their own life to look like. It was the place they had built the barn together, badly at first and then better, learning as they went. It was the place their daughter had learned to ride a bike on the gravel drive, crashing and getting up and crashing again with the terrifying persistence of a 7-year-old who had decided that falling was just part of the process. It was Earl's place, and it was hers, and Victor Roth was not getting it. She washed out her tea mug and went to bed. She was a practical woman. Outside, the desert did what it always did in the hours after midnight. It got quiet in a way that cities never managed. A quiet so complete it had a texture, like something you could put your hand against. The stars came out hard and thick over the Mojave, the way they did when there was no moon and no cloud cover. 100 billion lights in a sky that the valley had not yet filled with enough ambient glow to wash them out. The roadrunner that nested somewhere near the old water tank ran its night route along the fence line and disappeared into the creosote. A coyote called from the ridge and got no answer. The farm sat in its 40 acres and waited, the way old things wait, with patience that has nothing to do with passivity and everything to do with knowing that time moves at its own pace and that endurance is its own form of power. Dorothy slept. She had learned long ago that sleep was not a luxury. It was equipment. 3 nights later, on a Friday, a chain of motorcycles came down Route 66 out of the dark. Dorothy heard them before she saw them. She was on the back porch with a glass of water, unable to sleep for once, watching the stars and thinking about nothing in particular. Or rather, thinking about everything in a loose circular way that the mind does when it has been under a certain kind of pressure for a long enough time that the pressure has become ambient, just part of the background noise of being alive. The sound of the engines was distinctive. Not one bike. Multiple bikes in formation, the particular layered roar of a group riding together, engines tuned differently, riders throttling at slightly different rhythms. The whole thing building into a sound that was less mechanical than organic, more like weather than machinery. She saw the headlights strung along the road about a quarter-mile out, a moving constellation coming from the east. She watched them pass her turnoff, slow, and then stop. She waited. The engines did not start up again. Through the desert air, which carried sound across distance with fidelity that still surprised her after 38 years, she could hear voices, not the words but the tone. Something was wrong. A problem with a bike. Someone with a flashlight crouching near the road. Dorothy set down her glass of water, went inside and got her first aid kit. Then she walked down her driveway with a flashlight of her own. There were 9 of them. Big men, every one in leather vests, some in helmets, most without. The bikes were pulled to the shoulder in a practice line, the riders giving space to the 2 at the center of the problem. A man crouching over a motorcycle that sat wrong on its frame, chain dangling loose and dark against the asphalt, and another man sitting on the guardrail with his right hand held out in front of him, palm up, dripping steadily. The crouching man heard her footsteps and rose. He was in his late 50s, broad, with gray at the temples, and the particular stillness in the body of someone who had spent decades in situations that rewarded stillness. He wore a leather cut over a dark thermal shirt. He looked at her flashlight, at her first aid kit, and did not say anything for a moment. "I'm Dorothy," she said. "I'm a nurse, retired. That man's hand needs looking at." A beat, then, "Colt Briggs." His voice was deep, unhurried. "That's Hank. He's hard-headed and he'll tell you he's fine." "Hank," Dorothy said, redirecting the flashlight. Hank was in his mid-50s, built like a man who had moved heavy things for a living, with a full beard going silver and a face that was currently doing the particular kind of stoic that she had seen 1,000 times in emergency rooms. The expression of someone holding pain at arm's length through force of will, while pretending they were not doing this at all. "I'm fine," Hank said. "You have a laceration that needs pressure, possibly a cut to the pad of your ring finger, and your hand is going to swell in about 20 minutes, Dorothy said. "You're not fine. Hold still." She knelt in front of him without waiting for permission and opened the kit. The cut was from the chain, jagged along the base of the fingers, not arterial, but deep enough. She worked quickly and cleanly, the way she had always worked, with the economy of someone for whom the physical management of a wound was so thoroughly learned that it required no conscious thought, which freed her mind to do other things while her hands did their job. "You always walk up to strangers on highways with first aid kits?" Colt asked. He was standing slightly back, watching, not hovering. "My property starts where that guardrail ends," Dorothy said. And yes, one of the other riders, younger, made a sound that might have been a laugh quickly suppressed. Colt glanced at him and the sound stopped. "Your farm?" Colt asked. 40 acres. "You out here alone?" Dorothy looked up from Hank's hand briefly. "You planning something that would make that relevant?" A pause. Then something shifted in Colt Briggs' expression, not a smile exactly, but the precursor to one, the internal decision that a thing was worth smiling at. "No, ma'am." "Then it's not relevant." She taped the bandage and began wrapping. "You'll want to keep that clean and dry. Change the dressing tomorrow morning. If the swelling goes beyond the wrist, or there's any numbness in the fingers, go to urgent care." "How much do we owe you?" Colt asked. "Nothing." She closed the kit and stood, brushing road dust from her knees. "The chain is going to need a replacement. You carry a spare?" "Hank always carries two." "Smart." She looked at the bike. "You'll get it on, but the tension's going to be off until you can get it to a shop. Don't run it above 60 on the highway." Colt looked at her for a moment. In the light of her flashlight and the pooled light of the bike's headlights, she was entirely visible to him. A small woman in her 70s, gray-haired, in a flannel shirt and jeans and boots that had seen hard use, with the posture of someone who had spent decades on her feet and the eyes of someone who had spent those same decades seeing things clearly. "You need anything from us?" he asked, "before we get out of your way." It was an honest question, she felt, not a deflection. He was asking with the specific register of someone who understood that offering a thing was not the same as assuming it was wanted, that there was a dignity in being asked rather than assumed upon, and that the distinction mattered. "You can fix the section of fence post your third bike kicked when you pulled over," she said. Colt turned and looked. The post had cracked at the base when the bike's mirror had caught it at an angle. He had not noticed. "Ray," he said without raising his voice. A man materialized from the line of bikes with a roll of wire and the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this before. It took 8 minutes. Dorothy watched him work and did not watch him work at the same time, which was a thing she had learned to do in 31 years of paying attention to people in moments when they did not know they were being watched. The chain went on. Hank flexed his bandaged hand and said it felt better, which meant it hurt less, which meant the adrenaline was evening out. "Thank you," Colt said. "Safe ride," Dorothy said. She walked back up your driveway. She did not look back. Behind her, the engines started up one by one, the sound building and then moving, east to west along Route 66, diminishing until the desert absorbed it entirely, and there was nothing but the stars again, and the coyote on the ridge, who had apparently found someone to talk to after all. Dorothy went back to the porch and picked up her glass of water and stood for a while in the quiet. She thought about the man called Colt, who had asked if she needed anything without assuming she did. She thought about the way he had stood back while she worked and let her work without second-guessing her, the particular kind of trust that people extended to competence when they recognized it. She thought about Earl, who had been that way too, who had always known the difference between helping and crowding someone, and who had spent 36 years of marriage being the specific kind of present that gave her room. She went inside and went to sleep. In the morning, there was a bag on her porch steps. Inside, 2 pounds of coffee, ground, from a roastery in Kingman that she recognized as the expensive one on Oak Street. No note, no name, just the coffee and a neatly folded piece of paper that turned out, when she unfolded it, to be a $20 bill and a handwritten line that said, "For the fence post. Sorry we missed it in the dark." Dorothy stood in her doorway with the coffee and the 20 and thought about it for a moment. Then she put the 20 in the drawer where Earl used to keep the postage stamps, made herself a cup with the new coffee, and stood at the kitchen window watching the morning light come across the desert, which it did every morning with the same directness and honesty, asking nothing, offering everything, arriving whether you were ready or not. She was ready. Colt Briggs came back the next morning at 8 o'clock. He came alone, on the same bike, and he parked it at the edge of the gravel by the cattle gate rather than pulling all the way up the drive, which Dorothy noticed as she watched from the kitchen window. It was a small thing, that parking choice, but she had spent 31 years reading small things. The way a patient held their hands when they were afraid. The way a family member stood in a doorway when the news was going to be bad. The way an intern's shoulders set when they were getting ready to pretend they knew something they did not. Small things carried large information. He had parked there because he was not assuming welcome. He had come back, but he was leaving the decision about whether he was expected at the door in her hands. Dorothy poured a second cup of coffee and went to the front door and opened it. "Come in," she said. "Coffee's on." He came up the porch steps with the measured unhurriedness she was beginning to recognize as his natural pace. Not slowness, but deliberateness. A man who moved through the world as if he had somewhere to be and enough time to get there properly. He wiped his boots on the mat, which was another small thing. The kitchen was the center of the house in the way that certain rooms become central, not because of their size or their position in the floor plan, but because they are where the daily life accumulates, where the morning and the evening both begin and end, where the habits live. Dorothy's kitchen had Earl's coffee mug still on the hook he had always used, third from the left, because she had not been able to move it and did not see why she should. It had his reading glasses case on the windowsill and the photograph of him and a framed embroidery sampler that their daughter had made in middle school that said "home" in uneven letters with a border of crooked flowers. Colt sat at the table where she gestured and accepted the coffee she poured and did not immediately speak, which she appreciated. She sat across from him with her own cup, and they both looked out the window at the desert morning for a moment. "The coffee was good," she said finally. "Thank you. Least we could do. How's Hank's hand?" "He says it doesn't hurt." "It hurts," Dorothy said. Colt almost smiled. "I know. He should keep it elevated today. The swelling's going to peak around the second day. I'll tell him. He won't listen." "No, men like that never do." She said it without judgment. "But you tell them anyway. At least they know you saw it." Colt looked at her across the table. "You always like this?" "Like what?" "Direct. I don't have the patience for the other way," Dorothy said. "Used to. Life runs it out of you eventually." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "What are you doing in Kingman?" "Club meeting. We run through here a few times a year. Sometimes we stop over." "Iron Wolves," Dorothy said, because she had seen the patch on his cut in the darkness of the road. He looked at her with a slight recalibration of whatever he had been expecting. "You know the club?" "I know the name." Earl followed the motorcycle world. Not a rider himself, but he had an appreciation. She glanced at the window. He said the ones who gave bikers a bad name were the ones who wanted the reputation without the responsibility. He said the real ones were the other kind. Colt was quiet for a moment. "Earl was your husband?" 26 years. He's been gone 2 years now." "I'm sorry." "So am I," Dorothy said plainly, "every single day." It was not a performance of grief. It was a statement of ongoing fact, the way an honest person described an ongoing condition. Colt received it as such, without sympathy face, without the careful softening that people sometimes brought to grief as if it needed to be protected from its own weight. He just nodded once, which was the right response, she thought. What did Earl do? Paramedic, 28 years with Mojave County. Before that, he was a volunteer with the Disaster Rescue Corps, the Flood and Wildfire Response Operation. He was always running towards something. She drank her coffee. I told him once that it was ironic, him being the one who always showed up for other people's emergencies and then going the way he did, kitchen floor, nobody to call. He couldn't have known. No, but he would have hated it. He would have wanted it to be something dramatic. A last act. She shook her head. That was Earl. Colt had set down his coffee cup. His hands were flat on the table and he was looking at the photograph on the windowsill, the one of Earl in the kitchen light. His face had changed. It was subtle, the kind of change that only someone practiced at watching faces would catch. Something had moved through it. Not quite recognition, not quite memory, but something in that territory. His jaw had shifted fractionally, and his eyes had gone somewhere else for a moment before coming back. Dorothy watched him. She said nothing. Paramedic with the disaster corps, Colt said. His voice was the same, but there was something different underneath it. He started as a volunteer in 1998, went full-time with the county in 2002, did both for a few years in between. Colt picked up his coffee cup again. He drank from it. He looked back out the window. Dorothy did not press. She had learned that from 31 years of emergency medicine too. You learned the difference between a silence that needed filling and a silence that was doing work. This one was doing work. She left it alone. The sound of a car coming up the drive interrupted it. Dorothy looked out and saw Sadie's blue Honda, coming too fast the way Sadie always drove. She watched her granddaughter get out of the car, and she knew immediately from the way Sadie moved that something was wrong. Sadie was 19, built slight like Dorothy's side of the family, with dark hair and the kind of face that showed every internal state she was experiencing, whether she wanted it to or not. She had Dorothy's stubbornness and her mother's anxiety, which was a combination that Dorothy worried about sometimes in the quiet hours. Right now, Sadie's face was doing something complicated, and there was a hunch in her shoulders that Dorothy had not seen in a while. Graham. She came in through the back, the way she always did. She stopped when she saw Colt at the table. Sadie, this is Colt Briggs. He's a friend. Dorothy used the word without ceremony, which committed to it the way saying a thing out loud commits to it. Colt, my granddaughter Sadie. Colt stood slightly, the instinctive partial rise of someone who had been taught a certain way, and the habit had stuck. He nodded at Sadie. Morning. Sadie looked between them, absorbing the scene with the rapid calculation of the young, and something in her face shifted from whatever had been there when she walked in to a more guarded arrangement. Morning. She looked at Dorothy. Graham, can I talk to you for a sec? Sit down. You can talk to me here. Sadie hesitated. It's kind of private. Colt, Dorothy said, would you mind taking your coffee to the porch for a few minutes? Sure. He took his cup and went through the back door without comment. Dorothy heard the screen door settle and his boots on the boards. She looked at her granddaughter. Sadie sat down in the chair Colt had vacated and put both hands on the table and stared at them. She was wearing a jacket with the collar turned up despite the fact that the morning was already warm, and her hair was not brushed, which was not like her. What happened? Dorothy asked. Nothing happened. Sadie pressed her lips together. I need to ask you something, and you're going to be upset. I'm 74 years old, Dorothy said. I've had upset plenty. Just say it. Sadie looked at her. How much trouble are you in with the Roth people? Really? Because I've been hearing things. Where are you hearing things? Around. People talk. Sadie pulled out a thread on her sleeve. Graham, if they came back to the house again, would you the land is just land. You could come live with me. I'd take care of you. I don't need to be taken care of. I know, I'm not saying that. Sadie looked up. I'm scared, that's what I'm saying. I'm scared of what's going to happen. Dorothy looked at her granddaughter. She had been looking at this face for 19 years, since the day Sadie was born, and Dorothy had held her in the hospital while her daughter cried the specific, grateful, overwhelmed tears of new mothers. And she had looked at this face across every table and through every stage and change, and she knew it as well as she knew any face in the world. She knew what it looked like when Sadie was afraid. She also knew what it looked like when Sadie was afraid of something specific. Is there something you're not telling me? Dorothy asked. A pause. The thread on Sadie's sleeve gave way. No, Sadie said, I am just worried about you. It was not entirely a lie, but it was not the whole truth either. Dorothy had been a nurse. She knew the difference. She did not push. Some things needed to come out on their own schedule, and pushing them before they were ready only drove them underground. She had learned that from patients and from her daughter and from Earl, who had needed time in his own way for his own things, and who had always come to her when he was ready, and who had always been worth waiting for. "All right," Dorothy said. "I'm fine. The land situation is manageable." Sadie nodded, not entirely satisfied, and stood up. "I've got work at 10. I just wanted to check on you." She came around the table and hugged Dorothy with the particular fierceness of someone who was more afraid than they were letting on, holding a beat longer than a casual goodbye hug. "I love you, Graham," she said into Dorothy's hair. "I love you too," Dorothy said. "Drive slower on my driveway." Sadie laughed, which was the first real thing she had done since she walked in. She went back out the way she had come, and Dorothy listened to the Honda turn around and head down the road faster than it should have been. She sat for a moment at the kitchen table. Then she went to the back door. "You can come back in." Colt came in from the porch, bringing the morning air with him, the particular dry cedar and creosote smell of Mojave October. He set his cup on the counter. He looked at her with a question he was not asking. "My granddaughter," Dorothy said. "She worries." "About the sale pressure." Dorothy looked at him. "You know about that. Word travels. We come through Kingman regular. People in town talk." He pulled out the chair again and sat. "Roth's operation has been buying up the valley the last 2 years. Most folks have taken the offer. You're one of the last holdouts." "I'm aware of that," Dorothy said dryly. "He doesn't like holdouts." "I'm aware of that too." Colt looked at his coffee cup. Then he looked up at her. "What made you hold the line the way you are?" "Because most people, when a man pulls a gun, they start reconsidering." Dorothy was quiet for a moment. She looked at the photograph of Earl on the windowsill, the ordinary one, the morning light and the coffee cup and the glasses pushed down his nose. "This is Earl's farm," she said finally. "He built the barn board by board. He planted the ironwood trees along the drive. He put in the water system. He is in every inch of this property." She paused. "And the people who want to buy it don't want the farm. They want what's under the ground. They want to extract the gas and leave a hole and call it commerce and move on to the next place. And this place deserves better than that." She looked at Colt. "And I am not afraid of Victor Roth," she said. "I have sat with people in the worst moment of their lives, and I have held their hands and I have told them the truth, even when the truth was hard, and I have not flinched. A man who sends hired people to other people's porches with documents and guns is not someone who frightens me. He is someone who has never had anyone look him in the eye and say no and mean it." She looked at him with the direct, undecorated gaze that he was coming to understand was simply the way she looked at things. "I mean it," Dorothy said simply. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he set down his coffee cup. "There's going to be more pressure," he said. "The end-of-month deadline is real. When you don't sign, they're going to escalate." "I know. You have a plan?" "I have a lawyer in Flagstaff who is documenting every contact. I have the camera footage from Tuesday night. I have the county recorder filings that trace Roth's actual ownership chain." She looked at him. "And I have 31 years of dealing with people in crisis, which means I understand that the most dangerous moment is when someone realizes their usual methods are not working. That is when they get creative." Colt was watching her face. "When they get creative," he said slowly, "you're going to need more than a camera on the eve." "I know that too," Dorothy said. The morning had reached the hour when the desert light changed quality, going from the thin, clear blue of early day to the harder golden of mid-morning, light with weight in it, light that cast real shadows. It came through Dorothy's kitchen window and fell across the table between them and illuminated the ordinary things. The 2 coffee cups, the ceramic sugar bowl, the photograph on the windowsill, the man on one side and the woman on the other, both of them thinking about what came next. "I'm in Kingman through Sunday," Colt said. Dorothy looked at him. He held her gaze. He did not elaborate. He did not make it larger than it was or smaller than it was. He just said the fact of it and left it there on the table between them like an offering that she could take or leave. Dorothy Weaver thought about it for exactly 4 seconds. "More coffee?" she said. "Yes, ma'am," said Colt Briggs. She poured. The escalation came on Wednesday. Colt was at the Iron Wolves chapter house on the east side of Kingman when Hank came in from the street with the particular set to his jaw that meant he had something to say that he had already decided was going to cause problems. "Got a call from Ray," Hank said. He was at the table across from Colt, who was reviewing ride schedules with the chapter's road captain, a quiet man named Dale who ran a transmission shop on the south end of town and whose organizational instincts were paradoxically excellent. "He's been keeping an eye on the Weaver property like you asked." Colt looked up. "2 suits came out about an hour ago," Hank said. "Not the same crew as before. These ones had paperwork." "What kind of paperwork?" Ray couldn't get close enough to hear the whole thing, But he heard the old woman say the words forged easement, and then he heard the taller suit mention the granddaughter by name. Colt was quiet. The granddaughter, he said. Yeah, and whatever he said about her, it changed things. Ray said the woman's face went different, like she was calculating something she didn't want to be calculating. Colt closed the ride schedule folder. Dale picked it up without comment and went to the other side of the room. The granddaughter's name is Sadie, Colt said. He said it the way you said a thing when you were converting it from background information to active information. She came by the farmhouse yesterday morning. She said she was just checking on her grandmother, but there was something off about it. Off how? Scared, but not scared of the Roth pressure specifically. Scared of something more immediate. Something personal. He stood. I want to know if Sadie Weaver has any connection to Roth's operation. Debt, contract, anything. Get Cruz on it. Cruz was not Iron Wolves. He was a paralegal in Phoenix who did occasional research for the club at a rate that was kept deliberately unofficial, and who was, in Colt's estimation, better at finding financial paper trails than anyone he had ever hired at full price. Cruz is in Phoenix, Hank said. He has a phone and a computer. Tell him I need the Sadie Weaver financial picture in 24 hours. Any loan companies operating in Mojave County, any filing with Roth's holding companies. He paused. The name he's looking for is probably not Roth directly. It'll be one of the subsidiaries. Cornerstone Pacific or Ridgeline Asset Management. Those are the two I know of. Hank wrote it down on the back of a receipt from the diner, which was how Hank took notes. You sure about this? Getting into a civilian property dispute isn't usually what we do. Colt looked at him. That woman came out to a dark highway at midnight and fixed your hand, Colt said. And she didn't ask us for anything except the fence post. Hank was quiet for a moment. He looked at his bandaged hand. Fair point. Cruz, 24 hours. Colt drove out to the farm that afternoon, not because he had something to report, but because the thing Hank had said about Dorothy's face going different when Sadie's name came up had lodged in him, and he did not know what to do with it except go see for himself. Dorothy was in the yard when he arrived, pulling weeds from around a raised bed of fall squash, in the particular bent-at-the-waist posture of a gardener who had long ago decided that kneeling pads were an admission of something she was not prepared to admit. She did not stop when he pulled up. She looked over her shoulder, registered him, looked back at her weeding. You going to just stand there? She said. He pulled on a pair of work gloves he kept behind the seat and walked over and crouched at the other end of the bed. Those are weeds, she said, answering the question he had not asked. Good. They worked for a few minutes in silence. Visitors today, Colt said. Dorothy's hands kept moving. You had someone watching my property. Ray was on the highway. She pulled a root the size of a thumb. Two men from a firm called Cornerstone Pacific. They had a document they said was a signed easement agreement covering my back 40. My signature on it. She paused. I did not sign that document. You sure? She turned and looked at him over her shoulder with an expression that reminded him of every person who had ever looked at him when he had said something that deserved the look. I'm sure, she said. What did they want? They wanted me to acknowledge the easement. Once I acknowledged it, the access road they need to get equipment to the gas survey site would run directly through my back acreage. They'd have the legal right to use it regardless of whether I sold the property itself. She went back to the weeding. If I didn't acknowledge it voluntarily, they said they'd file for a declaratory judgment in Superior Court. That would take months. They said they understood I was on a limited income as a retired widow and that litigation was expensive. Colt looked at the row of ironwood trees along the drive. Earl had planted them. He had been told that. He could see it in how evenly they were spaced, the care of it. They mentioned Sadie, he said. Dorothy's hands stopped, just for a moment, then they started again. They said they understood she was a young woman just starting out, Dorothy said, and that it would be a shame if financial difficulties made it hard for her to get her feet under her. The way she said it was completely flat, not without feeling. The flatness was the feeling, the particular affectlessness of someone who had absorbed a blow and was managing it with the only tool they had left, which was keeping her voice level and her hands busy. What does she owe? Colt said. It was not a question. Dorothy pulled a deep weed, shook the dirt from its roots. $22,000, a personal loan she took out 14 months ago from a finance company in Bullhead City to cover a medical bill and first month's rent when she moved into her apartment. The finance company was absorbed by a larger operation 6 months ago. She stopped. Ridgeline Asset Management. Colt said nothing. I found out 3 weeks ago, Dorothy said. Not from Sadie, from the document those men brought today, which listed her name as a secured co-borrower on a refinancing agreement that I do not remember being party to, but which apparently I co-signed last year. Forged, I assume, along with the easement. She stood up, brushing her hands against her jeans. She looked at the back of her property, at the line of desert that ran south toward the ridge. They have my signature on documents I never signed, she said, which means someone has access to my personal financial information and Earl's estate documents, which means someone got into my papers at some point, or copied them, or had them copied. She turned and looked at him. I'm not a stupid woman, Colt. I know what this is. I know how it works. They're building a legal box around me. Every wall is a different document, a different liability, a different complication. And they're doing it slowly enough that each piece looks like a separate problem when it's actually one structure. Colt looked at her. You called your lawyer, he said. I called my lawyer. She's reviewing the easement document. She says it looks professional. Not the kind of thing a quick forger does, the kind of thing someone with access to a quality document service does. Dorothy's voice was steady, and her eyes were steady, and there was a quality in her stillness that he had been trying to name since the first night he met her on the highway and was only now finding the word for. It was not the stillness of someone waiting for things to happen to them. It was the stillness of someone waiting for the right moment to act. What I need is the original evidence, not just their word against mine. I need whatever trail they left when they accessed my documents. Because someone came into this house, or someone with authority over my mail and financial records did something with them. That's not a legal theory. That's a fact. She looked at him with the direct, undecorated gaze that he was coming to understand was simply the way she looked at things she needed to understand. Can you help me find it? She asked. He thought about what Cruz would come back with in 24 hours. He thought about the subsidiary structure, Cornerstone Pacific, Ridgeline Asset Management, the pattern of it. He had seen this before in the general shape of it. The way organized pressure campaigns had a fingerprint, a methodology that was consistent across targets, because the people running them had done it before and had not varied their approach because it had always worked before. I've already started, he said. Dorothy looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at her garden. I've got a pot of soup on, she said. You should stay for lunch. It was not a question and it was not a test. It was an invitation made in the plainest register, the way she seemed to do most things, without ornament, without subtext, just the direct offering of a simple thing to someone she had decided, apparently, was worth offering it to. All right, Colt said. They went inside and Dorothy ladled soup, and Colt sat at the table where Earl had sat 38 years of mornings, and neither of them spoke for a while. And outside, the ironwood trees cast their shadows across the drive in the long lines of October afternoon. And somewhere on the ridge, the coyote that had been calling the night Colt's chain broke was doing something in the brush, going about its own business, indifferent to the things that human beings were arranging and rearranging in the structures they built against the desert. Cruz called at 10 that night. Colt took it on the porch of the chapter house, standing in the dark with the Kingman light spread out to the west. Sadie Weaver, Cruz said, took out a personal loan with Southwest Finance and Lending in Bullhead City 14 months ago, $22,000 at 19% for medical and relocation expenses. Southwest Finance was acquired 8 months ago by an LLC called Ridgeline Asset Management LLC, registered in Nevada, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Cornerstone Pacific Development Group, which is the operating arm of a holding entity controlled by one Victor Roth. A pause. You with me so far? Keep going. The loan's current. Sadie's been paying it down. She's got $16,000 left, been making her payments on time. But 6 weeks ago, Ridgeline sent her a notice of technical default based on a clause in the fine print of the acquisition agreement, something about a change of servicer notification that she was supposed to return within 30 days, which she didn't return because nobody does, because nobody reads that clause, because it's buried on page 19 of a 22-page document. And the technical default means? It means they can demand immediate repayment of the full balance. They haven't done it yet. They're holding it, like a card. Colt stood in the dark and felt the shape of it come clear. The way a structure becomes visible when you find the right angle on it. They're using her debt to get to Dorothy, he said. That's how I read it, Cruz said. If Dorothy sells or acknowledges the easement, the debt gets quietly restructured back to normal terms. If Dorothy doesn't comply, Sadie gets a demand letter for 16 grand she doesn't have. And Dorothy doesn't know the loan is in technical default yet. She knows Sadie owes money. She doesn't know about the default notice. Based on what you told me, I'd bet Sadie hasn't told her. Probably trying to protect her grandmother from one more thing to worry about. Colt looked at the lights of Kingman, a town of 44,000 people, unremarkable from the outside, the kind of place where the same families ran the same businesses for 3 generations. The kind of place where a man named Victor Roth looked at a map and saw a gas deposit and looked at the families living above it and saw an obstacle to be managed. I need the full document package, Colt said. The acquisition notice, the default notice, all of it. Can you get it? I can get anything that's been filed in Mojave County or registered in Nevada. Give me until morning. He stood on the porch a while after he hung up, not thinking about anything in particular, or rather thinking about several things at once in the undifferentiated way that certain problems settle into the mind at night when the day's forward motion has stopped. He thought about Sadie's face at Dorothy's kitchen table, the fear in it, the things she was not saying. He thought about Dorothy's voice when she described the forged signature, the flatness of it that was not flatness at all. He thought about a woman who had walked out of her house at midnight to help strangers on a dark highway and had not thought twice about it. He thought about the coffee on the porch steps the next morning, the $20 bill, the note that said, "Sorry we missed it," in the dark. He thought about Earl. He rolled up his left sleeve in the dark, a habit, a reflex that he had done 1,000 times in the years since the tattoo had been there. Not to look at it, but to feel it. The way you checked on something important, confirming its presence. The lettering was simple: Earl Weaver, Kingman General, 2004. Below it, in smaller letters, he came back twice. He pulled his sleeve down. He went inside. He had a phone call to make in the morning. And after that, he had a decision to make about how much to say to Dorothy and when to say it. And that decision was not going to be simple, because the thing he knew now was not just relevant to the legal situation and the property dispute in the organized campaign that Victor Roth had been running against her. It was relevant to everything. But some things needed the right moment. He had learned that. You did not hand someone a truth and walk away. You made sure they had ground under them first. You made sure they were ready to hold it. Dorothy Weaver was as strong a person as he had met in 58 years of meeting people. But strength was not the same as ready. He would know when she was ready. He slept. In the morning, Cruz's documents came through, and the shape of Victor Roth's operation became, for the first time, something they could see all the way around. Cruz's documents arrived in a compressed folder at 7 in the morning. 43 pages of acquisition filings, loan agreements, default notices, and subsidiary registrations that told the story of Victor Roth's operation in the dry, precise language of financial and legal instruments. Colt sat at the kitchen table of the chapter house with a cup of coffee and read through all of it before anyone else was awake. He was a methodical reader, the kind who went back to reread sections that connected to each other across page gaps, who made notes in the margins of a printed-out document with a mechanical pencil because he had never fully trusted his memory not to simplify things. What he found was this: Roth's operation was not new. The earliest filing connected to it was 9 years old, a Nevada LLC registered in 2015 that had since been dissolved and replaced by 3 successor entities. The methodology was consistent across all of them. Identify land with underlying resource value. Acquire surrounding parcels at market rate through legitimate purchase. Apply escalating pressure to holdout owners through a combination of financial leverage, document manipulation, and physical intimidation until they sold at a price that looked reasonable, but which was calculated to be the minimum required to close the gap without triggering enough legal scrutiny to be dangerous. Extract the resource value. Move on. He had done it in Nevada. He had done it in New Mexico. He had done it twice in Arizona, in other counties, with the same pattern of subsidiary names cycling through different configurations to make each operation look unrelated to the others. The man who ran the ground-level operations, the man who arranged the document manipulation and the physical intimidation and the financial leverage, was listed in several of the filings as a project consultant. His name was Gary Decker. Colt looked at the name for a long time. Gary Decker. He said it inside his head in the way you tested the weight of a thing before deciding what to do with it. He knew that name. He had known it for 9 years. He had been trying not to think about it that whole time, and managing less and less well at the not thinking. As the years went on and the case stayed cold, and the driver who had run the red light on Jefferson Street in Flagstaff on a February night in 2015 had never been identified, and Dale had been in the ground for 9 years without anything like an answer. Dale had been 31 years old. He had been on his way home from a shift at the garage where he worked, and he had been crossing Jefferson on foot, and the vehicle had not stopped. The witnesses had given inconsistent accounts because it was night and because people in shock see things differently than people who are watching. The Flagstaff Police Department had worked the case for 6 months, and then the resources had shifted and the investigation had not been closed. It was just no longer being actively worked, which was how cases like that went when there were no clear leads and no political pressure, and no particularly powerful constituency demanding resolution. Colt had kept looking on his own. For 3 years he had kept a folder, spoke to witnesses, tracked down details that the official investigation had not prioritized. He had gotten close enough to a name once to feel the specific cold certainty of almost knowing. And then the lead had gone cold and his club brothers had staged what he thought of now as an intervention. Quiet and unsentimental. 3 men sitting across from him at a table telling him that whatever he was going to do with the name if he found it, it was going to destroy him and possibly several other people, and that Dale would not have wanted that. He had put the folder away. He had not forgotten it. There was a difference. Gary Decker, 2015 Nevada LLC filing. Project consultant, Cornerstone Pacific. Address, Flagstaff, Arizona, since updated to a Kingman post office box. He sat with it. Here was the thing about revenge. Everyone who had ever counseled him against it had been right, and he had known they were right, and it had not made any difference to the part of him that wanted it anyway. The wanting was not a choice. It was a fact. It had lived in him for 9 years, and it would probably live in him for the rest of his life. But he was 58 years old, and he had learned things. One of the things he had learned was the difference between a want that served the moment and a want that served the larger thing. And what was in front of him right now was larger than Gary Decker. What was in front of him was a 74-year-old woman whose land was being taken by the same man who had employed the person who killed his brother. And if he turned this into a personal matter right now, if he let the Gary Decker fact take over the Dorothy Weaver fact, he would do something that would blow up everything they had been carefully building. He put the Gary Decker page at the back of the folder and he focused on the front. He called Cruz at 8 o'clock. The pattern is there, he said. It goes back to 2015, 3 other counties. I found 2 of them, Cruz said. You got a third? Nevada. A cattle operation in Elko County, 2016. Same subsidiary structure. The rancher sold after 2 of his hands were arrested on trespassing charges that the county DA later dropped. But by then, he'd already signed. So we've got a multi-state operation with a consistent methodology. That's federal territory potentially, depending on whether any of the financial instruments cross state lines. All of the loan structures do, Colt said. The Nevada registration, the Arizona operations, that's wire fraud at minimum. I'm going to need to talk to someone in the U.S. Attorney's Office, Cruz said. There was something careful in the way he said it, the way you said a thing when you were aware that the path forward had weight. Do it, Colt said, but slow. We go in with everything we have, clean, documented, so that when we hand it over, there's no daylight for them to lose the thread. There's another name in the Flagstaff filing, Cruz said. I saw it. A pause. You all right? Cruz asked. I'm fine. Colt. I said I'm fine. Do the thing. He paused. If there's a way to connect Decker to the Flagstaff hit and run through his address and timeline, I want it documented. But I want it documented separately, in a clean package. For the Flagstaff PD, not for me. A longer pause. That's the right call, Cruz said quietly. I know, Colt said. Make it anyway. He set the phone down on the table and finished his coffee. Outside the window, the Kingman morning was coming on dry and bright and without apology, the sun already halfway up the sky with the particular efficiency of the desert, which did not ease you into the day, but simply arrived at it. He called Dorothy at 9. I need to come out, he said. I have something to show you, and I think Sadie should be there. A pause. How bad is it? It's workable, he said, but it's more complicated than you knew, and you need to know all of it. All right, Dorothy said, I'll call Sadie. He drove out. Hank was with him because Hank had a right to be there, the bandaged hand and all, because this had started on a dark highway with a chain that needed fixing and Hank's blood on the asphalt. And Hank had a claim on whatever came next. Sadie was already there when they arrived, sitting on the porch steps with her knees pulled up and her face doing the thing it had been doing when she came in on Sunday. The barely held together quality of someone who had been managing something too big to manage alone for too long. Dorothy met them at the cattle gate. They sat in the kitchen, all four of them, and Colt laid the documents on the table in the order he wanted to walk through them, and he started from the beginning. He explained the subsidiary structure. He explained the acquisition of Southwest Finance and Lending, the purchase of Sadie's loan, the technical default clause. He explained the forged easement and the forged co-signature, and he explained what he believed, based on Cruz's analysis, was the mechanism. Someone with access to Dorothy's mail, likely during the period of estate processing after Earl's death, had copied enough of her financial documentation to construct convincing forgeries. Sadie was looking at the table. Her jaw was set in the way of someone who was trying to hold themselves together through concentration. "You knew about the default notice," Dorothy said to her. "Not a question." Sadie looked up. "I got it 6 weeks ago. I didn't know what it meant at first, and then when I found out." She stopped. "I didn't want to put it on you. You had enough. I thought I could figure it out." "Sadie." "I know." Her voice was thin. "I know, I should have told you." Dorothy looked at her granddaughter for a moment. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over Sadie's hand, one brief, complete gesture, and then moved it back. "Now we both know," she said. Hank, who had been silent since they arrived, sitting with his coffee and his bandaged hand, and the particular quality of attention he gave to things that mattered, said, "What's the play?" Colt looked at him, then at Dorothy. "The play is to build a case that goes to the county prosecutor and to the U.S. Attorney's Office simultaneously. The financial crimes cross state lines, which makes it federal. The document forgery is state. We go on both tracks at once, and we make enough noise that neither one can be quietly deprioritized." "Visibility," Dorothy said. "Exactly," Colt said. "Roth's operation works because it stays below the threshold of public attention. Every one of his targets has been dealt with individually, privately, in ways that look like separate local disputes. The moment it becomes a connected story with a name and a pattern, it stops being something he can manage. You have the other county cases. Cruz has them. He's documenting the pattern now." Colt looked at her. "But the anchor has to be you, your farm, your documents, because this is where it breaks, if it breaks. The others sold, you didn't." Dorothy looked at the ironwood trees through the window. "Earl never sold anything that wasn't his to sell," she said. It was not directly relevant, and she knew it. It was something she needed to say. "No," Colt said, "he didn't." Something in the way he said it made Sadie look at him. He was looking at Dorothy's profile, at the photograph on the windowsill, and there was something in his expression that was not grief exactly, because it was not his grief to have, but was in the territory of grief, the adjacent province. Sadie was sharp enough to notice. She looked between Colt and her grandmother and did not say anything. "When does this start moving?" Dorothy asked. "Today," Colt said. "Cruz files the federal complaint today. The county prosecutor gets the package by end of week. And in the meantime," he paused, "I'd like to have some of my brothers on the road past your property in rotation. Nothing aggressive, just visible." Dorothy looked at him. "You think they'll come back before the end of month?" "I think when people don't get the response they expect, they accelerate." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Sadie, and Sadie looked back at her, and something passed between them that did not need words. The specific, compressed communication of two people who know each other well enough that the shorthand runs beneath language. "All right," Dorothy said, "but they're not camping in my yard." "Road only," Colt said. "And they're not scaring my neighbors." "They won't. They'll just be there." "Fine." Dorothy stood and began collecting the coffee cups in the efficient, purposeful way of someone who was ready for the next thing and was communicating readiness through action. "Stay for lunch." "We can't," Hank said, standing. "You can," Dorothy said without looking at him. "And you will. I made pot roast and it takes 4 hours and there are only 3 of us and it is not going home in a container." Hank looked at Colt. Colt looked at Hank's bandaged hand. "We're staying for lunch," Colt said. Hank sat back down. Sadie, for the first time since she had arrived, something in her face released. It was not all of it. The fear was still there, the residue of 6 weeks of carrying something alone. But some weight had shifted. The particular weight of a thing that has been held by one person for too long and has finally been distributed among more hands. She looked at her grandmother moving in the kitchen, the absolute unhurried competence of it. the specific grace of someone who had been feeding people for 50 years and who expressed most of her deepest feelings through the precise and reliable offering of a good meal. Sadie got up and went to the kitchen and took the cutting board down from the shelf where it had always lived, in the same spot it had been in since she was small enough to need a stool to reach it. And Dorothy handed her the celery without looking, and Sadie began cutting it, and neither of them said anything. Outside on the desert, the October light was doing what it always did in the afternoon, tilting toward the long gold of approaching evening, laying shadows from the ironwood trees across the gravel drive in lengthening lines that moved slowly the way everything in the desert moved, with the patience of something that had no deadline, that had been here before the roads and the houses and the farms and the people, and would be here after. Hank looked out the kitchen window at the land. "Good farm," he said to no one in particular. "It is," Colt agreed. "The pot roast when it came was outstanding. No one said so because no one needed to. There are meals that carry their own argument and require no supplement." The arrest came on Thursday morning. Dorothy was in the barn checking the water lines when the two Mojave County Sheriff's deputies pulled up the drive. She heard the tires on the gravel and came out into the morning light, wiping her hands on a rag, and saw the vehicles and understood immediately what they meant. She had understood since Wednesday, when Roth's people had not come back and had not called, that the silence meant a change in approach. Silence from that kind of operation did not mean retreat. It meant preparation. The deputies were professional. They explained the warrant clearly. A complaint had been filed by a neighboring property owner claiming that irrigation equipment belonging to his farm had been taken and found on Dorothy's property. A deputy and a county assessor had attended the neighboring property at the owner's request and confirmed the equipment was missing. A second deputy had found it, or what he identified as it, in Dorothy's storage shed on the east side of the barn. Dorothy knew the equipment. She had walked past it twice in the past week and had not recognized it as hers, which she had filed in the back of her mind as a vague curiosity and had not followed up on because she had been occupied with other things. She understood now what it was and how it had gotten there. "I didn't put that equipment in my shed," she said. "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent," the deputy said. He was young, maybe 26, and he was doing his job the way someone did a job when the job felt wrong, but the paperwork was in order. She had worked with enough people in 31 years to recognize the specific quality of discomfort that came from following instructions you had questions about. "I'm not going to be silent," Dorothy said. "I'm going to be clear. I did not put that equipment in my shed. I have a security camera on the east eave of this barn that has been running continuously for 3 years, and which will show you when that equipment arrived and who brought it." The deputy wrote something in his notebook. "We'll look at the camera footage," he said, "but I'm required to execute the warrant as written." "I know," Dorothy said. "I'm not arguing with you. I'm giving you information you'll need." She looked at both of them. "I'd like to call my lawyer before we go." She called Nora Finch from the porch while the deputies waited. Nora picked up on the second ring. Dorothy explained the situation in the flat, organized way she explained things, without panic, without performance. "Don't say anything else to them," Nora said immediately. "Be cooperative, be polite, give them nothing. I'll be at the county jail in 2 hours." "I know," Dorothy said. "I've been dealing with people in difficult situations for 31 years. I know how to be cooperative and quiet." "Dorothy," Nora's voice had something in it. "I'm sorry this is happening." "So am I," Dorothy said, "but it's happening because we're close, which means it was always going to happen. Be there in 2 hours." She hung up and looked at the deputies. "All right," she said, "let's go." She did not look back at the farm as the deputy vehicle pulled down the drive. That was a deliberate choice. She looked forward, which was the only direction that required her attention. Colt got the call at 9:17 from Ray, who had been on the highway and had watched the whole thing from the road. He was at the chapter house in 11 minutes. Hank was already on the phone. "Wait," Colt said. He was at the table with his phone, calling Cruz. "I heard," Cruz said when he picked up. Ray texted the chain. "We need the camera footage from the barn eve before anything else. If they pull it before we do and it disappears." "I can be there in 40 minutes, Cruz said. "I've been in Needles since yesterday working on the federal package. 40 minutes. Go." He called Nora Finch next. "I know," Nora said. "I'm already on the road, 2 hours." The camera footage is the critical piece. The equipment was planted in the last 72 hours. The footage will show when. "That's what I assume," Nora said. "I need someone I trust to pull it before anyone tampers with it." "Cruz will be there in 40 minutes. He knows what he's doing." He was at the county detention facility by 10:30 with Hank beside him and 4 other brothers arriving behind them in the next 30 minutes. He did not go inside. That was not his role, and he understood that clearly. His role was presence, the specific visible fact of organized people who were paying attention, which was the thing that made the difference between a thing that got quietly managed and a thing that did not. By noon, there were 18 bikes in the parking lot of the Mojave County Sheriff's facility. They were parked neatly, far enough from the entrance to be legal, close enough to be visible. The riders stood near their bikes or sat on them or leaned against them and drank coffee from thermoses and did not block any entrances and did not threaten anyone and were, by every objective measure, simply present. A deputy came out at 12:15 and looked at them from the steps. Colt walked over. "We're not here to cause problems," he said. "We're here because a member of our community was brought in on charges that are fabricated, and we want it to be visible that people are paying attention." The deputy was the same young one from the morning. He looked at Colt and then at the 18 bikes and then back at Colt. "You're going to be out here all day," he said. "As long as it takes," Colt said. The deputy went back inside. Nora Finch arrived at 1:15. She went inside and came back out 40 minutes later. "She's fine," Nora said. "She's composed. She's saying exactly the right amount, which is nothing." A brief pause. "She asked me to tell you that she expects the pot roast leftover situation to be resolved by the time she gets back." Colt looked at her. "Those are her words," Nora said. Something that was not quite a smile moved through him. "How long?" "The arraignment will be this afternoon or tomorrow morning." "I'm pushing for this afternoon. The warrant paperwork has issues, which I've already noted. The camera footage that crews pulled this morning is exactly what you said it would be. Clear footage of a man in a gray pickup leaving that shed at 2:17 on Tuesday night. Definitely not Dorothy and definitely not equipment she would own, because the footage catches the plates. The plates. Crews ran them. The truck is registered to a holding company in Henderson, Nevada." She looked at him directly. "The same address is listed in one of the Cornerstone Pacific filings." Colt was very still. "That's a direct chain," he said. "It's a very direct chain, which is actually unusual for Roth's operation. Usually there's more distance between the order and the act." Nora's expression was the particular one of a lawyer who had found something clean to work with after months of complicated material. They moved fast with the plant because they were out of time. They didn't have the luxury of being careful. "Because someone in or near Roth's operation knows we've been building a case," Colt said. "Exactly." The arraignment happened at 4 o'clock. By 4:45, Dorothy Weaver walked out of the Mojave County Sheriff's facility into the October afternoon on a personal recognizance bond, because Nora Finch had presented the camera footage and the plate registration and the chain of ownership to a county judge who looked at the evidence and looked at the charges and adjusted his reading glasses and said in a voice that had 30 years of bench patience in it that the bond would be set at personal recognizance and that the county prosecutor's office should expect a motion to dismiss within the week. Dorothy came down the steps into the parking lot and stopped. She had known there would be bikes. Colt had told her, through Nora, that he was there. She had known the shape of it. What she had not expected was 23 bikes, which was what it was by 4 o'clock. Brothers having come in from Bullhead City and Lake Havasu through the afternoon as the word spread. She stood at the bottom of the steps and looked at 23 motorcycles and 23 men standing near them in the late afternoon light, and for a moment she stood perfectly still. Colt walked across the lot to her. "Your pot roast," he said. She looked at him. Something in her face, held very still since the morning, shifted slightly. "It'll need reheating," she said. "That's fine." She looked at the bikes again. "I have a small kitchen," she said. "They're not all coming to your house," Colt said. "They just wanted to be here." Dorothy Weaver looked at 23 men who did not know her, who had driven in from 3 different cities to stand in a parking lot on a Thursday afternoon, because someone in their network had said there was a woman who needed it to be visible that people were paying attention. She did not say anything for a moment. She looked at each of them, the way she looked at things, directly and without sentiment, but not without feeling, the two not being the same thing. Then she raised her hand once, in the way of someone acknowledging a fact. Several of them raised their hands back. Nora Finch, watching from the steps, said later that it was one of the most dignified things she had witnessed in 30 years of law. Sadie, who had driven over when Cruz called her, came up beside her grandmother and took her arm. Not the help you walk kind of arm take, but the here I am kind, and Dorothy let her, which Sadie knew was significant. They drove back to the farm as the sun went down. The pot roast was cold, as predicted. Colt reheated it on the stove while Dorothy sat at the kitchen table and drank a glass of water and let herself be still for a few minutes. Sadie cut the bread. Nobody talked about what had happened, which was the right call, because some things needed a little distance before they could be words. Later, after the food was eaten and Sadie had gone home and Hank had gone back to the chapter house, Colt sat on the porch with Dorothy in the dark, both of them with coffee, and the desert did its desert thing, going deep and quiet and full of stars. "They're going to escalate again," Dorothy said. "They're out of moves," Colt said. "The footage, the plate registration, the federal filing crews submitted this morning. They're going to find out very soon that someone is looking at the whole pattern, not just the Kingman piece. And when they find that out, they'll cut their losses on this property. Roth will. He's not going to go down for this particular farm. He'll try to quietly disentangle." Dorothy was quiet for a moment. "And Gary Decker?" Colt looked at his coffee. He had not told her about Decker. He had not told her about Dale. He had made a decision about the order of things and the moment for each thing, and this was not yet the moment for that particular truth. "Decker is the operational man," he said, which was true and was not the whole truth. "He ran the ground-level campaign here and in the other counties. When Roth cuts his losses, Decker becomes exposed. He's the one who actually executed the forgeries, who arranged the evidence plant." "You know more than you're saying," Dorothy said. He looked at her. She was looking at the dark. "I know some things that aren't ready yet," he said. "When they are, I'll tell you." She accepted that. She was a person who understood that some things had their own timing. She had learned that from medicine and from marriage and from the particular patience required to live in the desert, which did not accommodate urgency well. "Earl would have liked you," she said. Colt held his coffee cup. "He sounds like a man worth liking," he said carefully. "He was," Dorothy said. "He was the best person I knew. I say that without qualification. In 64 years of knowing people, he was the best. The stars were very bright. He would have had opinions about all of this," she said. "The legal strategy, the bikers in the parking lot. He would have talked it out for 2 hours and then agreed with whatever I'd already decided." Colt almost smiled. "That sounds about right," he said. She looked at him sidelong. "You know something about Earl," she said. It was not a question. It was a perception delivered as a statement, the way she delivered most of her perceptions, directly, without dressing. He looked at his coffee. "Not yet," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at the dark. "All right," she said. And that was all. And the night went on, and the stars above the Mojave burned with the particular intensity of stars above a desert, which is to say brilliantly, extravagantly, without apology, in the way that things burn when there is nothing to dilute them. Cruz found the Flagstaff connection on Friday morning. He called Colt at 6:45, which told Colt the call had been coming since before dawn. "Gary Decker," Cruz said, and then he paused in the way of someone who had been running toward a thing and had arrived at it and was now standing in front of it. "Tell me," Colt said. He was already dressed, already at the window of the chapter house with his coffee, watching the street. Address registration places him in Flagstaff from 2013 to 2016. He moved to Kingman in the spring of 2016. His Nevada LLC consulting agreement with Cornerstone Pacific was signed in March 2016. Another pause. February 2015. He's there. His vehicle registration in Flagstaff shows a 2014 GMC Yukon, dark blue, at that address. Colt did not say anything. "I sent the full package to a detective I know in the Flagstaff PD, Cruz said. "Cold case unit. I couriered it last night through the attorney of record for your brother's estate. It's clean. There's no connection to anything we're doing for Dorothy. Different package, different attorney, different pathway. He'll look at it. He'll look at it. I've known him for 6 years. He's the kind of person who finishes things." A brief pause. "Colt, I need to say something and I need you to hear it." "Say it. You know about this now. You've known since Thursday morning, and you have not done anything with it except put it in the right hands. That is the right thing. I need you to keep doing the right thing." Colt looked at the street. A pickup truck went by, early morning, someone heading to a job site. "I know," he said. "I'm not questioning you, I'm just—" "I know," Colt said again. "I'm going to keep doing the right thing. For Dorothy, for the case, for Dale." He stopped. "Because Dale would have told me to." Cruz was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said, "he would have." "Thank you," Colt said. "For the package, for doing it clean." "That's what you do when you want something to stick," Cruz said. They hung up. Colt stood at the window for a while with his empty coffee cup. Dale had been 31 years old. He had worked in a garage because he loved engines the way their father had loved engines, the way some things pass through families in the blood without needing to be taught. He had been on his way home from a late shift, crossing Jefferson Street on foot because his truck was in the shop, and the dark blue Yukon had run the light and not stopped. The witness accounts had been inconsistent, as they always were at night, as they always were when people were in shock, each person's memory shaping the darkness into something slightly different. The investigation had stalled because investigations stalled when there were no clear leads and no political pressure, and no one with enough standing to keep asking. Dale had been 31 years old, and Colt had been 49, and he had never completely stopped looking. Not in a way that consumed him, in the way that a stone in your boot consumed you. Not all of your attention, but enough, the ongoing specific awareness of something wrong that had not been addressed. Now someone else was addressing it, properly, through channels that would hold up. He washed his coffee cup and went outside and started his bike. He had a farm to check on. Dorothy was not at the house when he arrived. She was in the south field, walking the fence line with the methodical attention of someone who had been doing the same walk for 38 years and could tell from the quality of the wire tension whether anything needed attention. She looked up when she heard the bike, raised a hand, and kept walking. He parked and followed her. "The county prosecutor called Nora this morning," Dorothy said without preamble, talking to the fence line rather than to him. "The motion to dismiss is being reviewed. Nora thinks by end of next week." "That's fast." "The evidence is very clean," Dorothy said. "Cruz filed the federal package yesterday," Colt said. "U.S. Attorney's Office in Phoenix. They opened a preliminary inquiry." "How long does that take?" "Weeks to months. Cruz knows people in that office. He's been working the relationship. And in the meantime, Roth knows we've filed. He'll know by end of today, probably. His attorneys will be monitoring." Dorothy pulled at a section of wire. It was tight enough. She moved on. "He's going to come back," she said. "He might send someone. He won't come himself. Roth doesn't come to the places where things happen. He's always 3 layers removed. Except for Gary Decker." Colt was quiet for a half step. "Except for Decker," he said. Dorothy stopped walking and looked at him. The morning light was full and direct on her face, and she looked at him with the same quality of attention she had turned on him the first night, at the highway, working on Hank's hand with the calm efficiency of someone for whom focus was a habit. "You have something to tell me," she said. He had been thinking about this moment since Thursday morning when he had seen Gary Decker's name in the Cornerstone Pacific filing. He had been thinking about the order of it, the readiness of it, the specific question of when a person was prepared to receive a thing that would require them to reorganize something fundamental about what they knew. Dorothy was about as prepared as a person could be. She was standing on her own land. The case was moving in the right direction. The immediate danger had receded to a manageable level. She had enough ground under her. He looked at the south fence line, the long straight run of wire that Earl Weaver had set in the ground 38 years ago. "I need to show you something," he said. He pulled up his left sleeve. He held his arm toward her, the inside facing up in the October light. She looked at it. Earl Weaver, Kingman General, 2004. Below it, he came back twice. Dorothy Weaver looked at the tattoo for a long time. Colt watched her face. He watched her read the name. He watched her read the date. He watched the connection form in the way that connections form when a piece of information resolves several things at once. Not quickly, not with drama, but with the slow settling of a thing that has found its place. 2004, she said. "Kingman General, I was 33 years old. I came off my bike on Route 66, about 12 miles east in August. There was oil on the road from a blown gasket on a truck that had gone through an hour before. I came around the curve and the back wheel went out, and I went over the guardrail." Dorothy was still looking at the tattoo. "The drop was about 20 feet, Colt said. I landed in the culvert. 2 cracked vertebrae, punctured lung, compound fracture in the right leg. The paramedic who got to me first told me later he had thought it was a recovery rather than a rescue." "Earl," Dorothy said. "He went down into the culvert, twice. Once to stabilize me and get the cervical collar on, and once because my airway was compromised and he needed to do a suction and couldn't do it from the top." Colt paused. "He told me he'd fallen on the second trip down. He was laughing about it when he told me, like it was a thing that happened that he wanted me to know the truth about." His voice had something in it, not broken but worn at the edges, the way the surface of a thing wears when it has been handled often. I was in the hospital for 6 weeks. I asked for the paramedic's name, and the hospital gave me his service record listing. I never met him. I was in and out for most of the critical period, and by the time I was coherent enough to ask for him, he had rotated out of the county run that covered that stretch. Dorothy was looking at his face now, not at the tattoo. "He never told me your name," she said. Her voice was very even. "He wouldn't have. That's how those people work. They do the thing and they don't make it about themselves." "He came home that evening and he had mud on his boots from the culvert," Dorothy said slowly. "I remember because he never came home from a call with mud on his boots unless something had gone wrong and he'd had to go somewhere he wasn't supposed to go." She stopped. "He said it was a good one." That was what he said when someone had been close. He said it was a good one, and he ate his supper and went to bed. Colt pulled his sleeve down. "I put the tattoo on about a year later," he said. "I'd had time to think about what it meant. He came back twice. He didn't have to go down the second time, technically. The procedure could have waited for the proper rescue team. He did it because waiting would have meant a different outcome, and he knew it." Dorothy looked at the fence line. "A good one," she said again, very quietly. Colt waited. She put her hand on the fence post, not gripping it, just resting it there, the way you rested a hand on something solid when you needed something solid. "He never said who," she said. "He never said your name or where you were from or anything. Just that it was a good one. He wasn't doing it so anyone would know," Colt said. "That was the point of it." "I know," Dorothy said. "That was Earl." They stood at the south fence line in the morning light, the desert stretching out beyond the wire into the country that had been here before all of them. And neither of them spoke for a while. And the silence was the particular kind that is not an absence of communication, but is, in fact, the most complete form of it. "He saved your life," Dorothy said finally. "Yes. And 20 years later, you're here." "Yes?" She looked at him. "He would have hated knowing that," she said. "He would have been mortified. He never wanted to be repaid. He would have said, 'You don't owe me a thing. Go home. The debt doesn't exist.'" "I know," Colt said. "That's why I'm not here for the debt." He paused. "I'm here because a good woman is having her land taken by people who counted on her not having anyone. And that's the thing I can help with. The rest of it." He looked at the tattoo side of his arm, the sleeve covering it now. "That's between me and Earl." Dorothy looked at the ironwood trees along the drive, the ones Earl had planted. "He planted those the second spring we were here," she said. "He said they were for shade, but we both knew they were slow-growing trees and the shade wouldn't come until we were old." She paused. "He liked the idea of planting things that would be here after us. He said that was what you did when you loved a place." Colt looked at the trees. "The shade's good," he said. She looked at him with something in her face that was not quite a smile but was in the same territory. The internal version of one. The kind that lives behind the eyes rather than on the mouth. "Come in," she said. "I'll make breakfast." They walked back to the farmhouse across the south field in the October morning. The old woman and the biker, across the land that Earl Weaver had planted and tended and loved for 38 years. In the shade of the trees he had put in the ground for the people who would come after. Which was them, and which was enough. The federal inquiry moved faster than anyone expected. In the week following Cruz's filing, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Phoenix made 2 calls. The first was to Cruz, asking for the full document package and the contact information of the farmers in Nevada and New Mexico. The second was to a senior investigator in the Mojave County Sheriff's Department named Patrice Odom, who had been quietly compiling her own file on the Cornerstone Pacific land acquisition since August, when a farmer in the North Valley had come to her with a story that had patterns she recognized. Patrice Odom had been looking at this from one side. Cruz had been looking at it from another. When they compared notes on a Wednesday morning in a conference room at the county building, the shape of the thing became, for the first time, fully visible. Victor Roth's operation had run for 9 years across 4 states, 13 properties in total. Of those, 11 had sold. Dorothy's was one of 2 holdouts, the other being a ranch in Elko County, Nevada, whose owner was 81 years old and had, according to the county assessor who tried to work with him, the most comprehensive understanding of obscure property law of any layperson the assessor had ever encountered. That rancher had retained an attorney 18 months ago and was also cooperating with the federal inquiry. 2 holdouts had given Roth's operation nowhere left to go. Patrice Odom called Dorothy on Thursday. "I want to meet with you," she said. "Not at the department, somewhere neutral." "My kitchen," Dorothy said. She came on Friday morning with a file folder and the particular quality of attention that Dorothy had come to associate with people who were serious about what they were doing. Colt was at the farm when she arrived. He stayed because Dorothy asked him to stay, and because Odom, after a brief assessment, did not object. They sat at the kitchen table and Odom walked through what she had. The evidence connecting Gary Decker to the evidence plant at Dorothy's barn was, Odom said, comprehensive. The truck plates, the surveillance footage from Dorothy's Eve camera, and a cell tower ping that placed Decker's registered phone within a quarter-mile of the farm at 2 in the morning on Tuesday night. Taken together with the document package crews had assembled, it made a case that would be difficult to defend against. "We're arresting Decker today," Odom said. "That's why I wanted to meet with you first. We expect him to cooperate in exchange for a reduced charge, which means he will identify the people above him in the operational chain." "Roth," Dorothy said. "Roth and at least 2 people in his legal and financial network who facilitated the document forgeries." Odom looked at her carefully. "The case against Roth himself is being built in parallel. The charges will take longer to formalize, but the federal inquiry is active and the Phoenix office is treating it seriously." "How long?" Colt asked. "Before charges? Months, probably. Before the operation is effectively shut down and the asset freeze goes into place? Weeks. The court in Phoenix will grant the preliminary freeze once the inquiry is formalized." Dorothy looked at the photograph of Earl on the windowsill. Then she looked at Odom. "The other families," she said. "The ones who sold. The 2 who sold under what the evidence shows was direct duress are being contacted about restitution proceedings. The legal path for them is longer and less certain because they signed voluntary sale agreements, even if those agreements were obtained under coercion." Odom paused. "It's not a clean resolution for them." "Nothing about this was clean," Dorothy said. "No," Odom agreed. "But it's the right direction." Colt looked at the table. "Gary Decker," he said. Odom looked at him. "Yes." "The Flagstaff package that came through the cold case unit." A pause. "I know about it. It was received and it's been assigned." She held his gaze. "That investigation is separate from this one, conducted by a different unit. I have no jurisdiction over it and no ability to affect its timeline. What I can tell you is that the detective who received it is thorough and that he has a vehicle registration and a location timeline and a motive connection." "He's not going to walk away from it," Colt said. "He is not," Odom said. "He is not that kind of detective." Colt nodded once. Odom looked at him for a moment with an expression that was not sympathy exactly, but was in the same territory. The look of someone who understood the weight of a long unresolved thing and the specific way it felt to see it finally begin to move. "I'm sorry about your brother," she said. Colt looked at his hands. "Thank you," he said. The arrest of Gary Decker that afternoon was unremarkable by the standards of the events that had preceded it. 2 deputies, a warrant, a cooperative subject who had apparently spent the previous 48 hours speaking to an attorney and arriving at the clear-eyed conclusion that cooperation was his best available option. He was at the county facility by 3 o'clock. By 5 o'clock, his attorney had contacted the prosecutor's office about a proffer agreement. By 7, the first set of names had been delivered, and one of those names was the name of the person inside Roth's legal network who had accessed Dorothy's financial documents through the estate processing service that had handled Earl Weaver's affairs in the months after his death. The pipeline from Roth's organization to Dorothy's private papers had been a paralegal at the firm that handled her estate, a young woman who had copied documents from the file during the processing period and sold them to a contact at Cornerstone Pacific for $4,000 because she had debt she was not managing and because she had not understood what the documents would be used for or not wanted to understand, which was a distinction that the prosecutor's office treated with the appropriate seriousness it deserved. Dorothy received this information through Nora on a Friday evening, sitting in her kitchen with Colt across the table and the last light going down over the Mojave outside the window. She sat with it for a while. "She was probably 22 years old," Dorothy said. "Probably around there," Colt said. "In debt and making a bad decision." Dorothy looked at the table. "I don't excuse it. What she did cost me a great deal, but I understand the situation she was in well enough not to be surprised by it." She paused. "People make poor decisions when they're desperate. I spent 31 years watching that." "The prosecutor's office is deciding what to charge her with," Colt said. "I know." Dorothy looked out the window. "I'm going to write a letter to them. About proportionality. I'm not asking for nothing, but I'm not asking for everything either." Colt looked at her. "You sure about that?" he said. I'm sure that the people who are most responsible for what happened to me are Victor Roth and Gary Decker, Dorothy said. A young woman with debt who made a bad choice is not the primary target here. And I'm not going to let her become one just because she's easier to reach than the people above her. She stood and went to the counter. I'm going to make tea, she said. Do you want some? He did not usually want tea. He was a coffee man, and they both knew it. Sure, he said. She made it. They sat with it in the last of the evening light, the farm around them going through the motions of October, the coyote on the ridge saying something to the dark, the ironwood trees doing the quiet structural work of ironwood trees, holding their shape against the wind, which was their purpose and their nature, and the thing Earl Weaver had known when he put them in the ground for the people who would need their shade. The Roth Operations Asset Freeze was filed in Phoenix Federal Court on a Friday in November. It was not dramatic in the way that large legal events were sometimes dramatic. There was no press conference, no announcement, no visible external change to anything on the surface of the world. The filing went into the court system at 9:14 in the morning, and by noon a judge had signed the preliminary order, and by 3 o'clock, the banks and financial institutions involved had received notice. Victor Roth's land acquisition program stopped. Cruz sent Colt a text that said simply, "Frozen." Colt forwarded it to Dorothy. Dorothy read it at the kitchen table and looked at the photograph of Earl and said out loud, to no one in particular, "That's enough, Earl." Which was what she said sometimes when something had resolved, not a dismissal, but a completion. The specific acknowledgement that the account had been settled and the matter could rest. She made herself a cup of tea and went out to the garden and worked until dark. The farm work did not pause for legal proceedings. It had its own calendar, the fall harvest coming in, the winter preparation underway, the water system that needed checking before the cold hit. Dorothy moved through it with the efficiency of someone for whom physical work was not a burden, but a form of thinking. The body doing what the body knew while the mind did its own work in the background. Sadie came out on weekends now, sometimes just to be there, sometimes to help with whatever needed helping. She had started looking into programs at the Kingman Community College, the agricultural management track, which made Dorothy think of the squash she had been harvesting and the soil tests she had been running, and the general question of who would work this land when Dorothy was too old to work it herself, which was a question she had been not thinking for 2 years and was now, cautiously, beginning to think. Hank came by twice with brothers from the chapter to fix the section of fence line along the eastern boundary that had been damaged by the evidence plant incursion. They came with tools and did the work and drank Dorothy's coffee, and one of them, a younger man who did not say much, fixed a gate latch that Dorothy had been managing around for 3 months, and which he apparently noticed without being asked. She gave them all lunch. She had decided, good at giving people lunch. Gary Decker entered his guilty plea in early December, 3 days before Christmas. The Flagstaff charge was included in the consolidated agreement. The sentence was 11 years, concurrent on multiple counts, which was not nothing and was not everything, and Colt, who had driven to the Flagstaff courthouse to be there for the reading, stood outside after and called Cruz. "It's done," he said. "Yeah," Cruz said. "Dale's on the record." "He is. His name is in the record. The finding is there. It's closed." Colt stood outside the Flagstaff courthouse in the December cold. The mountains visible to the north under a pale sky, the traffic going by on the street without knowing or caring about what had just been resolved inside the building behind him. "Merry Christmas," Cruz said. "You too," Colt said. He drove back to Kingman. He pulled up at the farm at 3 in the afternoon. Dorothy was on the porch with a mug, watching the light. "How did it go?" she said. 11 years, Colt said. "Dale's charge is in." She looked at him for a moment. "Come in," she said. "I have pie." He came in. There was pie, which was apple, and it was excellent, because everything Dorothy made was excellent. And he ate a piece at the kitchen table, and she sat across from him with her tea, and they were quiet for a while, in the way that had become their way, the particular comfortable silence of two people who did not need to fill space with noise and knew it. "You doing all right?" Dorothy asked. "Yeah," he said. "I'm doing all right." He looked at the photograph of Earl. "It doesn't undo anything. He's still gone, but it's closed. That matters." "It does," Dorothy said. "You asked me once," he said, "why I came back the morning after the highway, after I brought the coffee. I remember. I didn't fully know then." He looked at his pie. "I think I knew that there was something about you that I recognize. Not in a personal way, in the way you recognize a quality in a person that you've been looking for without knowing you were looking for it." He paused. The way you came out to that highway, you weren't thinking about whether it was safe or sensible. You just came out because someone needed help. That was the whole of it. Dorothy looked at him. That's how Earl was, she said. I know, Colt said. That's what I recognized. The motion to dismiss came through on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the arrest. Nora called Dorothy at 8 in the morning. Dorothy was in the garden. It's done, Nora said. Dismissed with prejudice. The county prosecutor filed the motion herself, which is not the usual procedure, but which in this case indicated that she wanted the record to be unambiguous. With prejudice means they can't refile. It means they can't refile on these charges. It means the arrest is expunged from the record. It means legally it did not happen. A pause. I'm going to do something unusual and tell you that this is one of the cleanest outcomes I've seen in 20 years. Dorothy looked at the garden, at the fall squash coming in along the east bed. Thank you, Nora, she said. Thank yourself, Nora said. You held the line. Dorothy hung up and stood in the garden for a while. She thought about what holding the line had cost. 3 weeks of managing fear that she did not show because showing it would not have helped anything. An afternoon in a county detention facility that she would not pretend had been easy, even if she had handled it with composure. The ongoing weight of knowing that the people who had access to her private papers had gotten there through the most vulnerable period of her life. The months after Earl died, when she had been putting one foot in front of the other and trusting that the people handling the estate were doing so with integrity. She thought about what holding the line had given. The case now moving against Roth and Decker, the federal inquiry open and proceeding, the other farming families in the path of Roth's operation now visible to the investigators who were looking. The particular knowledge that staying had mattered, that the choice to refuse the first offer and all the subsequent ones had been the right choice. Not because it had been easy, but because it had been hers. Earl's farm. She picked a squash and weighed it in her hand and set it in the basket. Colt came by that afternoon. He sat at the kitchen table, and she made coffee, and he did not say the obvious things, which she appreciated. Victor Roth, he said. Nora thinks the federal case is building. Months, probably. Cruz says the U.S. Attorney's Office has opened formal interviews with 3 former employees of Cornerstone Pacific who are cooperating. She poured. It won't be quick, but it'll happen. Cruz thinks so. Nora thinks so. Dorothy sat across from him. I think so. People like Roth stay insulated because the people below them take the risk and the exposure. When enough of those people have reason to cooperate, the insulation fails. Dorothy looked at the table. And Sadie's debt, she said. Cruz handled it. He had told her this 2 days ago, but she was circling back to it now in the way of someone making sure a thing had been fully absorbed. The Iron Wolves made the payoff directly to Ridgeline's servicer. The loan is settled. It's done. She called me yesterday, Dorothy said. She cried for about 10 minutes. She said she didn't know how to handle it. What did you tell her? I told her to say thank you and mean it and then go build something. Dorothy drank her coffee. That's what you do with a gift. You don't spend your life carrying the weight of it. You put it to work. Colt looked at his cup. She's going to be all right, Dorothy said. Not a question. She is, Colt agreed. She's like Earl in some ways. She carries too much alone before she asks for help, but she's strong under it. Dorothy paused. And she's got people now. That's the thing that changes. The week between Decker's guilty plea and Christmas was a strange week for Dorothy. She had expected to feel resolved. The motion to dismiss had given her procedural resolution, the evidence plant reversed, the arrest expunged. The federal freeze had given her operational resolution. Roth's machinery stopped. The acquisition program ended. Decker's plea had given her something closer to justice, though not everything that word implied. She felt all of those things. She also felt, in the early mornings before the day's particular demands arrived, a different kind of thing that she was taking her time identifying. She had been living with the threat for 5 months. Since the first document offer in June, through the escalating pressure of July and August, through the men with guns on her porch in October, through the arrest in the parking lot full of motorcycles. 5 months of waking up in the morning and doing her calculations. What was new? What had changed? What needed to happen today? What needed to be kept in mind? She had not been afraid exactly. That was the honest assessment. She had been alert. There was a difference. Fear was a response to something unfamiliar. She had been alert to a situation she understood, one she had been assessing accurately from the start. The threat had been real. She had not minimized it, and she had not inflated it, and she had worked the problem the way she worked problems. systematically, without panic, one day at a time. Now the problem was resolved and the alertness that had structured her days for 5 months had no object. And she was rediscovering the texture of ordinary life without that particular organizing tension. She called her daughter in Portland on a Tuesday evening. Her daughter's name was Carla, and she was 46 years old, and she lived in Portland with her husband and their 2 dogs and the specific slightly guilty love of a child who had moved far from a parent they worried about. Dorothy had spent 2 years managing Carla's worry at arm's length, providing enough information to reassure without providing so much detail that the worry became a practical problem. Now she told Carla the whole thing, the full 5 months, the men with the guns, the planted equipment, the arrest, which she had not mentioned at the time because she had not wanted Carla to drive down from Portland in a panic. The charges dismissed, the federal case, Cruz and Nora and Patrice Odom, and Colt. Carla listened without interrupting, which told Dorothy she was taking notes, which Carla did when she was processing important information, a habit she had inherited from Earl. The biker, Carla said when Dorothy was done. Who came back? Who came back? Dorothy confirmed. Because of Dad, Carla said. Yes. A long pause. Dorothy waited. Dad saved his life, Carla said. In 2004, your father went into a culvert on Route 66 in August. He came back twice, which was not by the protocols, but it was what the situation required, and Earl knew the difference. Another pause. He never told me, Carla said. He didn't tell me either, Dorothy said. Not in the way of telling. I knew he had a good case that August because he came home with the look, but I didn't know the specifics. The look, Carla said. The particular one, when it was close and then it wasn't. Dorothy paused. He had it the night he delivered the Garcia baby on the roadside. He had it after the Havasu Creek floods. He had it in August 2004. Carla was quiet for a moment. The tattoo, she said. Earl Weaver, Kingman General, 2004. Dorothy looked at the photograph on the windowsill. The ordinary morning, the coffee cup, and the reading glasses. He came back twice. Carla made a sound that was compressed and not quite language. I know, Dorothy said gently. Mom, her daughter's voice was finding its way back to steady. Are you okay? Actually okay? I am actually okay, Dorothy said. I am living on my farm and the farm is fine, and the legal situation is resolved, and Sadie is enrolled at the Community College in Agricultural Management, and I have a reliable source of very good coffee. The biker, Carla said. He brings it from a roastery on Oak Street, yes. Another pause, and then Carla laughed, which was a sound Dorothy had needed to hear without knowing it until she heard it. Dad would have been insufferable about this, Carla said. He would have had opinions about all of it. He would have interrogated Colt for 4 hours, Dorothy said, and then announced his verdict, which would have been exactly what I had already decided, delivered as if it were his own original conclusion. Carla laughed again. I miss him, she said. I know, Dorothy said. So do I, every single day. You sound good, Mom. I am good. Dorothy said it cleanly, without qualification. I am not just managing. I am good. After they hung up, Dorothy sat at the kitchen table for a while with the quiet in the photograph and the particular sense of something having been said correctly. Then she went to bed. In the morning she was up before 6 and the coffee was on, and the ironwood trees were visible in the first light, their shapes clarifying as the dark drew back, and the coyote on the ridge said nothing, because sometimes the ridge was quiet, and that was all right too, and the farm held its shape in the early January morning, patient and present, the way it had been every morning for 38 years. January came to the Mojave the way January always came, without ceremony, without drama, with the clean, hard cold of a desert winter that did not care whether you were prepared for it. Dorothy had prepared for it. She had been preparing for winter in this valley for 38 years, and she knew its shape by now. The specific temperatures and the way the water lines needed to be monitored. The particular behavior of the garden beds under frost. The sound the old barn door made when the temperature dropped below 20 and the wood contracted in a way that the hinges did not. She was up before 6 because she had been up before 6 for 50 years, and she was not going to stop now. She made coffee in the kitchen with Earl's mug on the hook and the January dark pressing against the windows and the silence of the farm in the early morning. That was one of the things she loved most about this life. The quality of silence before the world started up, the particular readiness of it. There was a moment in November that Dorothy did not talk about much, but that she returned to sometimes in the quiet mornings. It had been a Wednesday, 2 weeks after the charges were dismissed, and she had driven into Kingman for groceries and the pharmacy. She was coming back to her truck with 2 bags when she saw the young deputy, the one who had been there the morning of her arrest, the one who had looked uncomfortable in the specific way of someone following an order he had questions about. He was coming out of the diner next door. He saw her at the same moment she saw her. He stopped. She could see him working through the calculation. Acknowledge it or let it go. He crossed toward her. "Mrs. Weaver," he said, "I'm Deputy Garrett Vance. I was there in October." "I know who you are," Dorothy said. He looked at her directly, which she respected. Some people in his position would have looked at the ground. "I want you to know that I looked at those charges and something felt wrong about them," he said. "I didn't have enough information then to know what. I know now." He paused again. "I'm sorry for what you went through." Dorothy looked at him. He was 26, maybe 27, with the particular combination of youth and earnestness that either wore away or deepened as people got older, depending on what they were made of. "You did your job as you understood it," she said. "And when you had more information, you felt something was wrong. That's the foundation of the thing." She shifted the grocery bags. "The question is, what you do when it happens again." "I'll do it differently," he said. "Good," Dorothy said. She drove home along the highway with the desert on both sides and the October light doing its final performances before the winter moderated it. And she thought about the young deputy and about the difference between the people who, when they saw something wrong, did something about it, and the people who did not. She thought that Garrett Vance was probably going to be useful to this county over the next 30 years, in the same way that the trees Earl planted were useful now, slowly, without fanfare, in the ordinary, incremental way of things that grew in the right direction. In March, Sadie enrolled at the Kingman Community College, the agricultural management program. She drove out to the farm the night before her first class and sat at the kitchen table with Dorothy and ate leftover soup and talked about the curriculum and what she was nervous about and what she was not nervous about. And Dorothy listened and asked the right questions and did not offer advice that had not been requested, which was the correct thing to do with a young person making their first serious independent step. "Graham," Sadie said at the end of the evening. "Yes, thank you." She said it in the particular way of someone who meant more than the word could hold. For holding on. To the farm. To all of it. Dorothy looked at her granddaughter. "This farm is going to need someone to run it eventually," she said. "I'm not going anywhere yet. But eventually." Sadie looked at her. "I'm not making promises," Dorothy said. "I'm just observing." "I'm observing too," Sadie said. They both looked out the window at the ironwood trees, dark in the evening, their shapes visible against the lighter dark of the desert sky. "Earl planted those," Dorothy said. "He said they were for shade, but they grow slow and he knew it. He was planting them for someone who would come after." Sadie looked at the trees. "They're good trees," she said. "They are," Dorothy agreed. Colt came through in April, on his way back from the Flagstaff gathering, where the Iron Wolves had done their annual spring meeting. He brought coffee again, the expensive kind from the roastery on Oak Street. He had been bringing it every visit since October, and she had stopped pretending not to notice the pattern. He sat at the kitchen table and she poured, and they looked out the window at the spring coming in. The way spring came to the Mojave, not the dramatic green explosion of wetter climates, but the subtle tonal shift of the desert as it responded to slightly more moisture and slightly longer light. The specific muted beauty of a place that expressed itself in understatement. "Victor Roth's attorneys filed a motion to suppress the financial records," Colt said. "Nora told me. The judge denied it. Cruz is consulting with the U.S. Attorney's team directly now. He drove to Phoenix twice this week. He's thorough," Dorothy said. "He's good at what he does." Colt drank his coffee. "He says it's 6 months to trial, maybe a year. But the charges are solid. He's not walking." Dorothy looked at the photograph of Earl. "Good," she said. Colt looked at the photograph too. He did that sometimes, looked at it the way a person looked at something that had meaning for them, directly but without appropriation. The specific, respectful regard of someone acknowledging a thing that was not theirs, but that they had a relationship with. "He knew," Dorothy said. Colt looked at her. "Earl, he knew things about the people he helped that he never said out loud. He carried them. I used to wonder sometimes in the early years what he carried that he didn't tell me about. She paused. Now I know about one of them. You're all right with it, Colt said. It was not quite a question. I'm all right with everything about it, Dorothy said. He did exactly what he would have done, and he didn't make it into a story, and he came home and put his boots by the door and went to bed. That's Earl. That's all of it. Colt looked at his coffee cup. I've been thinking about something, he said. Dorothy waited. The Iron Wolves run through Kingman 3-4 times a year. We always stop at the same diner on Oak Street. He turned the cup in his hands. I've been wondering if we could add a stop. Dorothy looked at him. I'm not asking to park bikes in your drive, he said. Just a stop for coffee. I make good coffee, Dorothy said. You make very good coffee, Colt agreed. She looked out the window at the ironwood trees in the spring desert beyond them, and the long view south toward the ridge where the coyote lived, and the sky above it all. The wide, clean, particular sky of the Mojave that was one of the specific gifts of this place. The sky you got when you stayed long enough to be given it. Tell them to watch the gatepost when they turn in, she said. The second one from the road. It's loose and the mirror on a wide bike will catch it. Colt looked at her. I'll tell them, he said. She poured him more coffee. The Iron Wolves came through Kingman on a Saturday in late spring, 8 of them on their way to a chapter gathering in Flagstaff. Colt had called ahead. Dorothy had made a full pot and put out the coffee cake she had made the day before because she had known they were coming. The 8 of them sat in her kitchen and on her porch with their coffees and their cake and the particular comfortable ease of people who were used to each other, and she moved among them, refilling cups and answering questions about the farm and the garden and the winter vegetables. And she felt, in a way that surprised her with its simplicity, entirely at home. Ray was there, the man who had fixed the fence post in the dark on the highway the first night. He sat at the kitchen table and drank his coffee and looked at Earl's photograph on the windowsill and said quietly, Colt told us about him, about what he did. Dorothy looked at Ray. He was a good man, she said. He was, Ray said. He said it with the specific conviction of someone who had considered the evidence and arrived at a conclusion. The kind that doesn't make noise about it. That's exactly right, Dorothy said. Ray nodded and went back to his coffee. After they left, riding east toward Flagstaff in the morning, she stood on the porch and listened to the engines until they were gone. The silence that came after was different from the silence before. It was the particular silence of a place that has had people in it and has let them go. The resonance of presence that lingers for a while before the ambient quiet reasserts itself. She had known that silence in the hospital, the quiet of a room after a family left, the air still carrying them. She went inside and washed the cups. Nora called in early summer with an update on the Roth case. The federal charges had been filed formally. Wire fraud, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. Victor Roth had appeared in federal court in Phoenix and entered a not guilty plea, which his attorneys had told the press was an assertion of his right to due process, and which the U.S. Attorney's Office had treated with the equanimity of an office that had the evidence it needed and was comfortable waiting. The civil proceedings were underway for the 2 farming families who had sold under coercion. They were long and uncertain in the way of civil cases involving large financial interest with competent attorneys, but they were moving. And your farm, Nora said. My farm is fine, Dorothy said. Any contact from Roth's side? Not since October. Dorothy looked out the kitchen window. They're not going to come back here. They've got enough to manage. Agreed, Nora said. I just want to make sure you know that if they do. I have the camera on the eve, Dorothy said, and I have Colt's number. A pause. That's a reasonable security system, Nora said. Dorothy smiled, which was something she did more often now than she had the year before, and which she had noticed and taken as information. It is, she said. Outside, the spring morning was doing its quiet work, the ironwood trees holding their leaves, the garden coming back, the land holding its shape in the sun with the patience of something that had been doing this for a very long time and fully intended to continue. Dorothy Weaver's farm, Earl's farm. The shade was good. The farm sat on its 40 acres and held. The roots went deep and the water ran clear and the fence lines held their tension and the barn stood in the light and the ironwood trees grew. Slowly, the way ironwood grew, without rushing toward a future that would come on its own schedule. Putting down the kind of roots that hold against the wind because they have been growing long enough to know where the ground is. There are places that become themselves fully only over time, that require a certain accumulation of seasons and decisions and people to arrive at what they were always going to be. This was one of those places. It was a farm at the edge of the Mojave Desert, on 40 acres of land that had belonged to two people for 38 years and would belong in some way that was not entirely about legal title to those two people for as long as anything that mattered was remembered. And in the kitchen of that farm, on an ordinary morning in May, a woman sat at her table with her coffee and the light coming through the window over the sink, and outside the ironwood trees moved in the spring breeze, which was light and dry and smelled of creosote and desert cedar, which was the smell of this place, specific and unrepeatable, which was what the smell of a love place always was. She was 74 years old, and she was here, and she was not invisible, and she was not afraid, and the land was hers, and the morning was hers, and all of it, every inch of it, every year of it, every ordinary, extraordinary day of it, was exactly enough. The coyote on the ridge said something to the morning. Nobody answered, because sometimes what you said to the morning did not need an answer. It just needed to be said. It just needed to be heard. Dorothy Weaver stood at her kitchen window and watched the light move across the desert, across Earl's farm, across the ironwood trees and the gravel drive and the barn he had built board by board 38 years ago, and she held her coffee cup with both hands the way she always had, and she thought about the night on the highway and the man who had parked at the edge of the gravel because he was not assuming welcome, and she thought about the south fence line and a sleeve rolled up in the October light, and a name she already knew in a place she had not expected to find it. And she thought about Dale and about Cruz doing things the right way, because that was how things stuck. And she thought about 23 motorcycles in a county parking lot in the late afternoon. 23 men standing by their bikes simply because they had decided to be present, which was not a dramatic thing and was not a small thing, and was exactly the kind of thing that Earl Weaver would have understood completely and would have called, without hesitation, a good one. She turned from the window and rinsed her cup and set it on the rack and went out to the garden because the garden had its own schedule and did not wait for reflection to finish. The desert light came down on the farm in its morning way, honest and direct and sufficient, and the ironwood trees stood in it the way they had been standing for 38 years, patient and rooted and deeply, permanently there. In the evenings that spring, after the day's work was done and the light had gone over the ridge and the desert had settled into its nighttime self, Dorothy sometimes sat on the back porch with a cup of tea and let herself simply be in the place without any particular agenda, which was a thing she had not been able to do for the better part of a year. The months of pressure had required a constant low-level readiness that she had not fully noticed while it was operating, because it had become, over time, simply the way she existed. It was only in its absence that she could feel the shape of it, the way you only fully understand the weight of something after you set it down. She was not unguarded. She was not naive about the world or about the kind of people who moved through it looking for what they could take from those who could not stop them. She had spent 31 years in emergency medicine, and she understood precisely how much damage the world was capable of inflicting on people who had done nothing to deserve it. She did not need to be taught that lesson. What she was, in those spring evenings, was at rest in the particular sense of someone who had done the thing that was required and had come through it with the important things intact. The farm was intact. Sadie was intact. The legal situation was moving in the right direction. Victor Roth was answering to a federal court, and Gary Decker was serving 11 years, and Dale Briggs had a closed case file with his name in it, and the long record of a wrong finally acknowledged. And the ironwood trees were still there, which she thought about more than she probably should have, and which she did not think she should have to apologize for. Earl had put those trees in on a Saturday in April in the second year they lived here. She remembered the day with the specific clarity of memories that attached themselves to physical sensation, the smell of the turned earth, the weight of the burlap-wrapped root balls, the way Earl had knelt at each planting hole with the focused care of someone who understood that a thing done badly now would be a thing regretted for a very long time. He had used a level to make sure each tree was planted straight, which she had teased him about at the time, because they were trees and they would find their own way, and he had said that was probably true, but that they were starting right regardless. Starting right regardless. That was Earl's approach to most things. It was not about perfection, and it was not about stubbornness. It was about the integrity of the initial act, the understanding that how you began something put its mark on everything that followed. She thought about this night Colt's chain had broken on the highway, and she had walked out with the first aid kit. She had not been thinking about starting right. She had not been thinking about anything except that someone needed help, and she was in a position to provide it, and that was the whole calculation. It was the same calculation she had made 10,000 times in 31 years, the same reflex, the same absence of the hesitation that might have been reasonable, that other people might have had, that she had simply never developed. Earl would have said she was born without a certain gear. She thought he was right. She thought it was one of the things they had recognized in each other early on, that neither of them had that gear, the one that made you stop and calculate your own exposure before moving toward the thing that needed attending to. They had found each other useful in this way, and then found each other in every other way, and then built 38 years of a life on a 40-acre piece of desert that had been theirs to take care of, and that they had taken care of well. Colt Briggs had that same missing gear, she thought. She had seen it in the way he moved on the highway that first night, the way he had stood back without making himself absent, the way he had asked if she needed anything without assuming the answer, the way he had driven 3 hours to stand in a courthouse parking lot in Flagstaff on a December morning because Dale's case was being read, and that was a day that deserved a witness. She did not compare him to Earl. That was not what she was doing. Earl was Earl and Colt was Colt, and the world was better for having had both of them moving through it in the particular way they each moved, attending to the things that needed attending to without requiring acknowledgement, without keeping an account. She drank her tea and listened to the desert. The coyote said something from the ridge, and this time there was an answer, from somewhere closer, maybe the old tank at the south end of the property, and the two voices went back and forth for a while in the way that coyotes communicated across distance, which was nothing like language, and was also, Dorothy had always thought, nothing unlike it. She stayed on the porch until the exchange finished, and the desert went quiet again, and then she went inside and washed her cup and went to bed. And in the morning the farm was exactly where she had left it, patient and solid and here, the way things were when they were built right and tended properly and held by someone who understood what they were for. She slept well. She had been sleeping well since December. There was one more thing that happened that spring, in late May, that Dorothy did not tell very many people about, but that she thought about later with a particular quality of warmth that settled in the chest and stayed there. She was at the hardware store on a Tuesday morning, buying replacement hinges for the barn door, when she ran into Mrs. Patterson, who was 81 years old and had lived on the parcel east of Dorothy's for 40 years and who had received, for 3 months running in 2022, anonymous payments toward her water bill when her pump had broken and the repair costs had overwhelmed her fixed income. Mrs. Patterson knew now where those payments had come from. Colt had apparently mentioned it to someone who had mentioned it to someone else in the way that information moved in small towns, through the channels of ordinary conversation, without anyone intending to make it a story. "I never thanked him," Mrs. Patterson said to Dorothy, there in the hardware store between the bins of replacement screws and the rack of paint swatches. "I tried, Colt. I wrote him a letter in care of the chapter house." "Did he write back?" Dorothy asked. "He sent a postcard," Mrs. Patterson said. "One of those Route 66 cards. It said, 'Don't mention it,' which I suppose is the point." She looked at Dorothy with the sharp, bright eyes of a woman who had been paying attention for 81 years and had not stopped. "He's a good man," she said. "He is," Dorothy agreed. "The kind that doesn't need you to know it," Mrs. Patterson said. Dorothy looked at the hinges in her hand. "That's the kind," she said. They parted in the parking lot, and Dorothy drove home on the highway with the windows down because the May morning was exactly the right temperature for windows down, dry and light, and carrying the cedar smell that came off the desert when the season was right. And she thought about a postcard that said, "Don't mention it," and a tattoo on the inside of her wrist that had been there for 20 years, and the specific way that some people move through the world doing the things that needed doing without requiring the world to take notice, and how the world took notice anyway, in its own time, in its own way, through the channels it had available to it. She turned onto her road and drove up past the second gate post, the loose one, which she had been meaning to fix for 6 months, and which she was now, she decided, going to fix this afternoon. And she parked in front of the barn and got out and stood for a moment in the May morning and looked at the ironwood trees and the barn and the house and the south fence line running out toward the ridge where the coyote lived. And she felt the particular satisfaction of a person standing in the exact place they are supposed to be, which is not a feeling that announces itself in dramatic terms, but which is, when it comes, unmistakable. She went inside and made coffee and then went back out to fix the gatepost. And the morning went on, around her the way mornings did, with the light moving and the shadows shifting, and the desert doing the things that the desert always did, when people were paying attention and when people were not. Patient and enduring and completely itself, the way everything was when it had been long enough in the same place to stop performing and simply be. Summer came to the Mojave the way summer always came, without asking and without apology, the temperature climbing through June toward the particular heat that the desert considered normal and that the rest of the country considered extreme. Dorothy had been living in this heat for 38 years, and she had made her peace with it the way you made peace with things that were not going to change, by understanding what they required of you and arranging your life accordingly. She worked in the early mornings before the heat became serious. She came inside by 9 and spent the middle of the day in the house with the evaporative cooler running and the shades drawn on the south and west windows. She went back out in the late afternoon when the sun had lost its worst ambition and worked until the light went. It was the same pattern she had kept for 38 summers, and it suited her the same as it always had. Sadie came out one Saturday in June with a notebook and sat at the kitchen table asking questions about the water system and the soil conditions and the history of what had been planted where and how it had done. The kind of questions that a person asked when they were thinking about a place as a working system rather than a backdrop. Dorothy answered them and showed her the logs she had been keeping in the same battered notebook since the mid-90s, Earl's handwriting in the early ones and her own in the later ones, the record of what the land had done and what they had asked of it. Sadie read through an old notebook for a while without speaking. Dorothy sat across from her and drank her coffee. He was meticulous, Sadie said, not looking up from Earl's handwriting. About everything that mattered to him, Dorothy said. The farm, the job. He kept his paramedic call logs the same way. He said if you didn't write it down, you were relying on a memory that was only going to get worse. Sadie turned a page. Did he ever keep a personal journal? No, Dorothy said. He said he didn't need to. He said if a thing was worth thinking about, he thought about it until he understood it, and then he was done. Sadie looked up. That's so him, she said. It is, Dorothy agreed. They sat with that for a while, with the June morning coming through the kitchen window and Earl's handwriting on the table between them and the farm outside, going about its business in the June way, which was hot and dry and full of the specific persistence of desert things that had learned to endure the worst of the season without drama. That was the thing about the desert that Dorothy had come to understand over 38 years, and that she had tried to explain to Carla when Carla was young and full of the particular California impatience with places that did not announce their beauty loudly. The desert did not perform, it simply was. Its value was not in what it looked like on a given day, but in what it was doing underneath, all the time. The root systems going down through the rock, the water moving through the aquifer, the whole slow patient apparatus of a place that had figured out how to survive in conditions that seemed to preclude survival. Earl had understood that. It was one of the reasons he had wanted to live here. She thought about what he would have made of the past year. The guns on the porch, the forged documents, the arrests, the parking lot full of motorcycles. She thought about what he would have made of Colt, of the Iron Wolves, of Ray fixing fence posts in the dark, and Hank with his bandaged hand insisting he was fine. He would have liked it, she thought. Not the threat, not the pressure, not the fear that she had managed at arm's length for 5 months, but the response to it, the way people had shown up, the way crews had built a case that was clean and solid and would stick, the way Nora had walked into a courtroom with footage and plate numbers and made the charges disappear, the way Patrice Odom had been building her own file since August and had recognized a pattern that nobody wanted her to see. The way a man she had never met had driven through the night from Bullhead City to stand in a parking lot on a Thursday afternoon because someone in his network had said there was a woman who needed it to be visible, that people were paying attention. Earl would have understood all of that. He would have called it, in his plain way, the right thing happening. And she thought about the tattoo on the inside of Colt's wrist, the simple letters and the date and the 4 words underneath. He came back twice. She thought about Earl in the culvert in August 2004, in the mud, doing the thing the protocol said could wait because his own assessment said it could not wait, because waiting meant a different outcome, and he was not willing to accept a different outcome when the better one was still within reach. She thought about how she had never known. Not the name, not the specifics, just the look when he came home, the look she had learned to read over 28 years, the particular quality of a man who had been close to something and had brought it back and was not going to make a story of it. A good one, he had said, and then he had eaten his supper and gone to bed. She sat at the kitchen table with her coffee and her granddaughter and Earl's old notebooks, and the June morning coming through the window over the sink. And she felt, in the way that she felt things when they were true and settled, that the farm was in the right hands. Her hands, for now. And after that, if the spring conversations meant what she thought they meant, Sadie's hands. And the ironwood trees that Earl had planted for the shade that would come when he was old would go on providing that shade for whoever came next, the same way they were providing it now, without drama, without asking to be noticed, simply doing the work they had been put in the ground to do. That was enough. That was, in fact, everything. She got up and poured herself another cup and stood at the window for a moment, looking out at the farm in the summer light, the heat already building, the land holding its shape against it the way the land always did, patient and rooted and here. She had been a nurse for 31 years. She had been a wife for 38 years. She was a farmer and a neighbor and a grandmother and a woman who walked out to dark highways with first aid kits because she had never developed the gear that made you stop and calculate your own exposure before moving toward the thing that needed attending to. She was 74 years old and she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was supposed to be doing, on exactly the piece of ground she was supposed to be standing on. She turned from the window and went back to the table and sat down across from her granddaughter, who was reading Earl's handwriting with the focused attention of someone learning the language of a place. And Dorothy picked up her coffee and said, "Turn to the June section." He always wrote more in June. Sadie turned to the June section. Outside, the summer morning went on doing what summer mornings did in the Mojave building, toward the heat of the day, with the steady patience of something that had been doing this since before anyone alive could remember, and would go on doing it long after the sun moving across the sky, and the shadows shortening, and the ironwood trees standing in the light, the way they had always stood, the way they would always stand planted by a good man for the people who would come after. Which was all of them, which was everyone, which was exactly and precisely enough.